Rain stitched itself across the airport windows in thin, glistening threads, blurring the distant planes into smudges of light and motion. The concourse had that morning hush before the day fully woke coffee steam, quiet wheels of luggage, the soft rubber thump of footsteps on carpet. Captain Marcus Reed sat near gate 32 with his cap in his lap and his back perfectly straight. The way he'd been taught 20 years ago when posture was a promise and not just a habit. He watched the wet runway without blinking for a long time, as if stillness might turn the world clear again. The cup of black coffee at his feet had cooled to a dark, reflective coin. He looked like a photograph of a pilot in a training manual-pressed uniform. Polished shoes, tie as precise as a drawn line. But his eyes told a different story, the kind that didn't need words. The skin beneath them had the muted color of sleeplessness. His right thumb, resting on the cap's brim, drew a slow circle, then another, as if keeping time with a song only he could hear. Every so often, a boarding announcement rolled overhead and he would glance up, not because it mattered, but because he was trained to attend to voices that sounded official. He had learned over years that showing emotion usually cost more than it gave back. So he kept his face quiet. Across the aisle, Alina Carter recognized quiet when she saw it. She had a librarian's posture upright, but soft and a traveler's bag with 2 books and an apple tucked inside. She'd taught middle school English for almost 3 decades and had developed a radar for the unsaid. She noticed him because, in a room full of fidgeting, he was still. In a room full of chatter, he was a vow held in the mouth. She watched the way his jaw set and released as he looked at the rain. She thought of all the kids she had taught who grew into adults who learned to hide their hurt in competence. When the first pre-boarding group gathered, people rose in uneven waves, families adjusting backpacks, a businessman with a phone pressed to his cheek, a woman laughing at a joke that wasn't funny. Marcus stood with the others, not rushing, and approached the gate with his boarding pass and crew badge in the same hand. The gate agent Chung hurried, tear pinned into a bun that was losing the day's first battle, scanned the pass, blinked, and then frowned at her screen. "Sir," she said, not unkindly, just distracted. "This ticket isn't valid for boarding." Marcus nodded once, as if agreeing with the weather. "I'm crew," he said. He didn't raise his voice. He laid the badge on the counter, letting the metal catch the light. "Captain Reed, Flight 217 to Charlotte." She looked from the screen to the badge to his face. Something in her expression tightened in certainty, mixed with the fear of making the wrong call. "One moment," she murmured, already typing, calling for a supervisor. "I just need to check something." The people behind him leaned forward, curious in the way strangers are when they sense narrative.
Alina,
2 places back in the priority line, saw the smallest change in him, not anger, not even surprise, just that microsecond of weariness, like a dimming bulb. She had seen it before in colleagues, when parents questioned their expertise, in kids when a shop clerk followed them too closely down the aisle. The particular fatigue of proving the obvious. "Rough morning?" she asked, stepping near enough to be heard but not to crowd him. The question was small, offered like a napkin at a table where something had spilled. He turned slightly. His eyes were the steady color of late-day sky. "It's fine," he said, and if there was a brittle edge to it, he smoothed it at once. He returned his gaze to the rain. "Happens." The supervisor arrived, lanyard jangling, face arranged into competence. There were apologies like bandages, quick and temporary, screens refreshed. A code cleared. "You're all set, Captain," the supervisor said, voice bright. "Appreciate your patience." Marcus picked up his badge and gave the tidy nod of a man who had practiced acceptance until it looked like gratitude. He glanced back at Alina, just enough to acknowledge the fact that she had acknowledged him. She smiled, not pity, not cheer, just a small human, yes. He moved down the jet bridge, his shoulders squared, the cap returning to the precise angle it belonged. In the cockpit, the air changed. The sounds were familiar battery on fuel pump click, the sweet chorus of systems. Waking. Marcus slid into the left seat and felt the day shift, the way it always did when he was surrounded by dials and logic, where behavior mattered more than opinion. His first officer, Raffi, a compact man with warm eyes and a calm humor, gave him a long look that said, Without words, you good? Good enough, Marcus said. They walked the checklist like breathing. Interphone, nav lights, IRS align. Outside, baggage loaders moved like figures in a slow play. Mechanic looked up briefly, recognized nothing, and everything returned. To his work, passengers filed past the open cockpit door in a procession of perfumes. Damp wool and the soft sound of personal histories. Alina paused at the threshold as the crew greeted travelers with the practiced music of welcome. She could see Marcus from the aisle, the concentration, the elegance of hands that knew exactly where they belonged. She didn't want to intrude, didn't want to be another voice asking for a piece of him. But curiosity is a cousin of care. She was not done noticing. She waited until the flow thinned, then stood just inside the little rectangle of door and light. You don't have to answer this, she said, keeping her voice low. But it looked like that wasn't the first time. Akus finished what he was doing, let his hand rest on the throttle for a beat longer than necessary, then turned his head. He didn't smile, and he didn't frown. He measured. The cabin air carried the faint citrus scent of the cleaning crew and the undertone of jet fuel. He could feel Rafi's attention, gentle and unprying at his side. It isn't, he said. The words landed softly, like a pocketed stone. It happens more often than I thought it would. You'd think a uniform would be a password, you know? He looked past her toward the rain-dark wing. My father flew crop dusters in Mississippi. Before he ever touched a commercial cockpit, he used to say, the sky was the only place that didn't tell him what he couldn't do. I thought. By now, he didn't finish. Lena nodded once, as if he had. He'd be proud you're here, she said. Not as compliment, but as observation. Like saying the runway is wet or the coffee is cold. Something in his chest let out a breath. Not a change anyone would see. Probably not even Rafi. Just a loosening in the hidden place where thoughts go when they don't have an address. Maybe, he said. He fiddled with a checklist he didn't need to fiddle with. Maybe he would. Welcome aboard, ma'am, Rafi said, his warmth laminated with professionalism. Thank you, Alina said, stepping back. Safe flight, Captain. You too, he said, then added, because it felt like it mattered to match the human scale of what she'd given. I like the cover of that book. The one in your bag. She touched the paperback, surprised and pleased by the specificity. It's not as good as the first one, she said, but there's a dog in it you'll remember. He nodded, and then the moment ended, because airplanes are creatures of schedule. The door closed with that rubbery hush that always felt like a commitment. The world outside softened into a spray of light and water. Pushback, taxi, the small ballet of right. Angles and patience beneath a gray sky. When they lifted, the rain fell away like a curtain, and the clouds opened into that impossible calm blue, the same forever blue that had steadied him since he was 12, and his father had let him hold the yoke, teaching him that the horizon wasn't a line so much as a promise. Cruising altitude carries a certain kind of quiet generator's worry. A porcelain clink from the galley, the murmur of passengers finding their comfortable versions of themselves. Marcus stared at the instruments and then threw them to nothing at all. The gate moment kept replaying not the words, just the feeling, the way a bruise remembers touch. You're all set, Captain. Appreciate your patience. He thought of all. The tiny paper cuts that shape a life. He thought of his father again, of the way he had worn his Sunday shirts on weekdays when filling out applications. As if the fabric could protect him from the word no, he didn't notice the tears until one cooled the side of his cheek. He wiped it without drama, without shame, just the way you brush away a fly, then took a slow breath. Afi saw the motion. Out of the corner of his eye, and pretended to adjust the overhead switch panel. Looking up long enough to grant the privacy of not looking, he said lightly, ATC wants us at 340 and 10, and that was that. The grace of work is shelter after landing. Charlotte greeted them with a sky the color of a steel kettle and a breeze that smelled faintly of magnolia. The arrival. Gate was crowded in the way of afternoon's people versus clocks. Marcus stepped out of the cockpit to do the casual walk through the cabin that leaders do when they want to be seen without being asked for anything. Alina was there in 12C, her book now a flag tucked into the seat pocket. She looked up and caught his eye. He paused. The aisle made a field of quiet around them. Good landing, she said, as if complimenting a student on a well-chosen word. Tailwind helped, he said. Then, because he had decided on the descent to choose something different than disappearing, he added, if you ever teach a class in noticing, I'll enroll. I've been teaching that one for 30 years, she said with a small smile. Most people pass. The exam is mostly listening. He laughed then, softly, the sound of a person remembering he could. Have a good connection, he said. You, too, she said, and he moved on. The aisle closing behind him like water. You don't plan to meet someone again in an airport. You just do. A month later in Minneapolis, the winter light made everyone's faces clear as photographs. Marcus, on a sit time with a soup that was mostly salt, saw her at a far table with a stack of essays bound by a rubber band and a pencil. Tucked into her gray hair, he might have let the moment slide if she hadn't looked up then. The same way she looked up in the gate area that first day, as if responding to a chord only she could hear. She lifted her hand in a small, unsure wave, then quickly made it less than a wave, something that could be mistaken for adjusting her sleeve in case he preferred invisibility. He stood, soup abandoned, and crossed the food court. How did the dog end up? He asked. No preamble, just the thread they'd left between them. Loyal in the way we don't deserve. She said, smiling, and motioned to the chair. He sat. The airport soundtrack beeps. Calls, laughter flattened into something like a river behind. Glass. They talked about the weather first, because that is the language of strangers becoming not strangers. Then books, because that is how you reveal yourself without bleeding. She told him about the 7th grader who wrote a poem about a refrigerator that made her cry in a way that felt like a gift. He told her how he still sometimes heard his father's thumbs drumming the yoke in turbulence, like a rhythm game to steady the air. He didn't tell her he had been carrying a vulnerability like a fragile instrument case in a crowd. He didn't need to. It sat between them like a third companion who hadn't been invited but was welcome anyway. When his phone buzzed with the 15-minute call, he stood reluctantly. I appreciate earlier, he said, and meant both the first day and this one. You said something simple, and it worked like, I don't know, ballast. Her eyes softened. Sometimes the right sentence is a handrail, she said. One you don't even notice you're holding. He nodded, and they parted. The airport swallowed them the way the ocean swallows two boats that waved at each other once and drifted on. The next time, it was Chicago, thunder muttering somewhere far beyond the glass. Alina had finished for the year, hallways emptied. Posters taken down, the particular ache of June goodbyes still damp in her chest. She was traveling to help her daughter after a difficult pregnancy, and worry sat in her like a small, hard pearl. She stared at nothing until she noticed the familiar angle of shoulders in a security line. The cap was in his hand again. The neatness was the same. It comforted her irrationally, the way the shape of a lighthouse might comfort a ship in bad weather. She waited beyond the scanners, saw her, and the surprise on his face softened into something like relief. Hi, he said, as if continuing a conversation paused for breath. You okay? She almost said fine, the way people do when they are falling apart. Then she remembered his fine at the gate and decided against the lie. My daughter, she said. Hospital tomorrow. It's routine, they say. But the word routine is working too hard. He nodded. The way people nod when they've been the child and the parent and the worried someone in the waiting room. What hospital? She told him. He searched his mental map and then said, the coffee's terrible in the lobby.
I'll bring
Your own, but the orange chairs by the window catch the morning light. Sit there if you can. It helps. She made a sound that was both a thank you and an exhale. How do you know? My mother liked those chairs, he said.
when my father was.
He let the rest trail off. They didn't need the right nouns. The verb was enough. The following morning, when Elena sat in the orange chair as prescribed, the light did the small good thing he'd promised. It gilded the worry, so it looked like something she could hold. Hours stretched, then folded. Her daughter texted a sun emoji with a heart, and Elena cried for exactly 12 seconds, and then wiped her face with the napkin from her coffee. She thought of writing to him, this near stranger, It felt like a bench on a long walk, but she had no address to send the gratitude to. She placed it in the air like a balloon instead. In August, an article floated around the industry forums about a captain pulled aside 3 times in 1 week for additional screening that had more to do with narrative than with safety. It wasn't Marcus in the article, but it could have been. He didn't share it. He'd learned that sending proof was sometimes a request for permission to be tired, and he was tired. That week on an overnight in Denver, he dreamed his father was flying low over fields of Delta cotton again, the biplane's shadow racing along the ground like a strange second self. In the dream, Marcus ran to keep up and couldn't, his lungs burning with the effort of trying to match a moving sky. He woke before dawn and texted, "Raffi, you ever feel like you're always showing ID, even when you're alone?" And then laughed at himself because the text would sit unsent. They didn't text about feelings. They sent memes of crooked windsocks and jokes about passengers clapping on landing. He walked to a diner near the hotel instead. "Waitress who called you honey without making it weird?" He ordered eggs and didn't eat them. He thought about quitting in the loose, abstract way people think about changing their names when they're stuck in traffic. He watched the door and didn't know he was waiting for anything until it opened and produced Alina with a carry-on. And a look he recognized immediately, the look of someone measuring the distance between 2 places, where I am and where I wish this day would be. She saw him, blinked, and then smiled in that small, grateful way that replaces hello when the world delivers a familiar face where you least expect one. "Coffee?" she asked, lifting her chin toward the counter. He made room on the stool beside him. "I'm terrible company today," he warned. "I'm a teacher," she said. "We invented terrible company days." He told her about the dream, which he didn't mean to do, and then about the article he didn't share, which he also didn't mean to do. He said it without bitterness, the way you talk about the weather when you've learned to carry an umbrella. She listened the way good people listen, head tilted slightly, not interrupting with solutions, offering the occasional sentence that framed his thought instead of replacing it. "My father used to fly low enough to see the faces of the men in their fields," he said. "He told me once, when you're that close, son, people look up and wave, even if they don't know who you are. I think about that when I'm at 35,000 feet with a door between me and everyone else. I'm too far away, too." "Wave. You waved," she said. "You waved to me at a gate." With half a sentence, she sipped her coffee. "Sometimes we wave by staying," he laughed, embarrassed and warmed.
Act.
"Staying isn't my best skill," he said. "Ask my ex-wife." "I won't," she said gently. "Da-da-da-da. But I believe you." The fall turned leaves into mosaics on the sidewalks of the cities he crossed. The air tasted metallic some mornings, sweet others. He found himself changing small things. He started carrying a second cap in his bag, because losing the first felt like losing a part of himself he refused to lose. He began arriving at gates 10 minutes earlier than needed, so if a conversation had to happen, it could happen with less audience. He kept noticing, against his will, the Alana-shaped gap at certain moments, like an open chair that made a circle. Incomplete, they didn't exchange numbers. There was a rightness to the accidental, the way a song on the radio means more because you didn't request it. And yet, life has a way of building paths when 2 people keep walking in the same direction. December brought them to the same hotel lobby, a Christmas tree blinking in the corner, and the particular ache of holidays spent in transit. "Do you ever feel like you live in a hallway?" Alina asked, watching a family take a photo in front of the tree. The mother's hand doing that little hover behind her toddler's back that mothers do, half protective, half habit. "All the time," he said. "But then sometimes the hallway has good art." They sat in the lobby chairs with paper cups of cocoa that neither had asked for, but both were glad to hold. He told her about his father's toolbox, kept under his bed long, after he stopped needing to fix things because the weight of it anchored him. She told him about a former student who had mailed her a photograph himself in a cap and gown, his smile of victory banner, and how she had framed it next to the bookshelf and looked at it on mornings when grading papers felt like lifting stones. "You ever think about retiring?" he asked. "Every Tuesday," she said. "And then I meet a kid who writes a sentence that tastes like rain, and I stay 1 more year." He considered this. Maybe I'll stay one more flight, he said. They laughed, and the laughter was a small window opening, letting air in. On a rainy Tuesday in March, Alina boarded Flight 408 to Boston and found a note tucked into the seat pocket. It was handwritten on a piece of flight plan paper, torn neatly at the edge. For Elena, thanks for reminding me why I fly. She looked up the aisle and caught the corner of his shoulder in the cockpit. The engines hummed with that good, deep certainty. The plane lifted through clouds and then broke into the uncomplicated blue. She closed her eyes and let the vibration of the fuselage calm her nervous system, one vertebra at a time. Later, passengers stood to deplane. A teenager in a hoodie paused by the open cockpit and said, "To no one and to everyone, man, I want to do that someday." Marcus turned, saw the kid's face. Seeger, nervous, guarded. He recognized himself and his father, and the long line of people who had stood in doorways and asked for entry. "Come look," he said, stepping back. "You can't touch anything," he added, and the kid laughed, relieved by rules. He showed him the altimeter, the way the numbers slow down when you want them to hurry. He showed him the yoke and said the word trim like it was a secret. The kid listened, posture changing in the way posture changes when purpose enters a body. When he turned to leave, he looked at Marcus the way boys look at men they are measuring themselves against. "Thanks," he said. "Don't let anyone talk you out of it," Marcus said. The kid nodded, and that was that. On a spring afternoon that smelled like wet pavement and possibility, Marcus found himself back at a small regional airport where the windows made halos of the tarmac lights, where coffee steamed, where people waited for the next right thing. He sat near a gate with his cap in his lap and his back straight, like always. But now the stillness felt less like armor and more like a porch somewhere you could sit and watch the day arrive. Elena walked in late, cheeks pink from the rush, hair pinned with a pencil again. She saw him and smiled in a way that made his chest feel like a door opening on clean air. "I brought a thermos," she said, pulling it out like contraband. "Real coffee." "Hospital lobby flashbacks," he laughed. "You're a hero." Shared the coffee in paper cups that went soft around the edges. She told him her daughter and the baby were fine, even the word fine said with the slack jaw of relief. He told her about the teenager in the cockpit and how the kid had lifted, his chin on the way out like the future had found its spine. She reached over and, without asking, straightened the edge of his cap, not a correction. A blessing. The boarding call came, and with it the choreography of travel. The gate agent scanned boarding passes, a line became a shape, and the world shuffled toward its next chapter. Marcus stepped forward, handed over his pass and badge, and the agent grinned. "Welcome aboard, Captain," she said. No hesitation, no supervisor. Just the right thing done the easy way. He nodded his thanks and glanced back at Alina. She gave him a small salute with 2 fingers, a joke that felt like a hug. He turned toward the jet bridge, the cap fitting perfectly in his hand, the air cool and smelling faintly of rain and rubber and beginnings. Inside the cockpit, he ran his fingers over the familiar switches, each one a friend in a world where certainty is a rare luxury. Rafi settled in with a sigh that might have been contentment. "Good day," Rafi asked. "Better than most," Marcus said. Looked out at the wet wing, the world he had chosen, again and again, even on days when it chose him back with conditions. He thought of his father's thumbs tapping the yoke. He tapped the yoke once, lightly like a doorbell. Ready, he thought. Ready to wave, ready to stay. When Alina took her seat, she found another note, this time smaller, tucked where the safety card lived. It was only a sentence. "You were right about the chairs. The light helps." She smiled and pressed the paper flat with her palm, smoothing a crease that wasn't really there. As the plane taxied, the hum filled the silences she carried, not erasing them but making room around them. She looked down the aisle, toward the cockpit door, closed now, but less of a wall than it used to be. People buckled belts, checked phones, adjusted air nozzles. Ordinary life, occurring at scale. She thought about how most of love was ordinary. 2 sharing coffee, remembering a small detail, asking a question at the right moment and then staying through the answer. The aircraft paused at the threshold of the runway, waited for clearance, and then moved forward with the kind of commitment that looks like grace from the ground. In the upward rush, the airport fell away, and with it, the old film of loneliness that had clung thin and persistent to Marcus's days. It wasn't going to nothing honest leaves completely, but it had been replaced by something lighter, a weight you could spend instead of hoard. He looked at the sky ahead, clean and improbable, and thought of a simple sentence spoken at a gate. He'd be proud you're here and how it had done what the best sentences do, built. A small bridge over a deep place. They climbed. The world. Below became a soft map. The sun found the window in a wedge, warming the back of his hand. In the cabin, a baby cried, then didn't. Someone laughed. Someone slept. In one foray, Alina underlined a sentence in her book, then wrote, in the margin, a word she would bring back to her classroom when summer turned into school again. Ballast. She would ask her students to find theirs. She would tell them a story that wasn't quite a story about an airport and a pilot and the kindness of noticing. She would not give them the ending, because endings are less important than what we carry into what comes next. Later, long after landing, long after new flights and other gates and new weather, they would meet again or they wouldn't. Matter. The connection had done its work. He stood a little taller now for himself, not just for how he looked in a glass window. Right. She felt less like the world was a hallway, and more like it was a house with a light left on in one room, waiting. And somewhere, a young man in a hoodie was Googling flight school requirements. His chin set at that particular angle hope gives you when it turns from idea to plan. On a night flight months later, clouds like islands glowing in moonlight, Marcus turned the cockpit lights down low and let the soft instrument green paint his hands. Rafi dozed with the practiced rest of a man who trusts the person next to him. The radio murmured. The sky outside was a black field pricked with distant farms of stars. He thought again of the first day, of the pause at the gate of the way. A stranger's words had arrived like a steadying palm between his shoulder blades. He reached for his pen and on the corner of a printout wrote a sentence he would never send to anyone but which felt necessary to write. I belong here. Then, beneath it, smaller, we belong to each other more than we know. We folded the paper and tucked it into the side pocket of his flight bag, a talisman, a private compass. Behind the door, the cabin breathed. Alina slept 2 rows back in the dark, her arm resting gently on the armrest. Face turned slightly toward the aisle, as if keeping an eye on the world. Even in dreams, the plane cut a clean line through the night. The horizon was only a suggestion, but it was there, as it always is, waiting to be found. And in that cockpit, in that hour, when most of the world forgets itself, 2 kinds of quiet held, the quiet of machines working, and the quieter quiet of a man who, for once, did not have to spend any energy proving who he was. They descended toward a city of sodium lamps and late kitchens. The controller gave vectors like a bedtime story. Geared down, flaps. The runway reached up and met them with a kiss, so soft half the cabin didn't wake. The tired cheered in the way the tired do silently. By sitting up straighter, he taxied to the gate with a gentle hand, feeling the weight of the moment settle into the day like a coin into a pocket, where it would be forgotten and then remembered at just the right time. The door opened. Air poured in, smelling like night. Rain and jet fuel and home. He stood in the cockpit doorway as people filed past. A few said thank you. One kid waved back. And when Alina came to the front, they didn't say much, a small, knowing glance, the kind that closes a long, soft chapter without the need for words. She touched the doorframe with her fingertips, a ritual she didn't know she'd made, and stepped into the jet bridge glowing with white light. He watched her go until the bend hit her, then turned back to clean up the last tasks that marked the end of a flight. Outside, the rain began again, thin and silver, threading the lights into halos. Inside, the last of the passengers disappeared, into their own stories. He clicked off the last switch, the cockpit settling into darkness that wasn't empty, but full of aftersound. like a theater once the applause fades. He picked up his cap, felt its familiar weight, and set it on his head. Then he breathed slow and easy and smiled to himself a small smile, the kind you wear alone when no one is asking anything of you for stepping into the aisle and out into the night that, like the sky, had made room for him.